Thank you, everyone, for making time to talk with us today. We're talking about Measure 26228, which is the measure to amend the Portland Charter to change the form of government and the way that we elect representatives or city council members. If we can start off first with the yes side, introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about why you think voters should support this measure.
I'll introduce myself, Debbie Kitchen. I'm an owner of a small business in Portland called Interworks. We're a general contractor.
My name is Paul Gronke. I'm a professor of political science at Reed College and the director of the Elections and Voting Information Center.
Good afternoon. I'm Becca Uherbelau. I had the honor of being one of the 20 charter commissioners. Also a long time civically engaged Portlander for the last 30 years. And I'll start off just giving kind of a brief overview of why we believe this measure is important for Portlanders. I first want to start off by just reflecting on my role as a member of the Charter Commission. In my 30 years of civic engagement in Portland, I have never been involved in something so intentionally inclusive, meticulously researched and thorough. 20 people from all different walks of life came together with no assumed outcome. We spent 18 months together, spent 1,000 hours. We had 4,000 people respond to our survey, 26 community listening sessions, 1,700 pieces of written testimony, 16 hours of public testimony, 87 public meetings, 127 different briefings and presentations. We had the benefit of looking at 2 different polls before we voted. And it really is an example of what can happen when a diverse and deliberative body are given the time, resources, and ability to come together and engage a broad and expansive range of Portlanders to inform a thoughtful policy. In terms of the policy, we all know what the problem is. I think we have shared agreement of what the challenge that we're facing. You know, Portland has had the same form of government for over 100 years, the commission formed since 1913. It has led to a system that is incredibly inefficient, ineffective, and oftentimes unaccountable, and certainly has lacked representation for all Portlanders. Since 1995, 75% of those serving on city council have been white men. We've only had 2 members of the city council who have lived east of 82nd. Only 9 women have served on the council so far, and only 5 people of color. The other thing I would just say in terms of the challenge facing us and the moving into solution, actually, the measure that will be before voters in November really helps address the inefficiency and unaccountability and underrepresentation for Portlanders. The measure moves away from the commission form of government, and city councilors will no longer manage the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. And that will be concentrated in accountable elected individual and the mayor with the help of a city administrator. That will lead to an efficient and effective service delivery and access for many Portlanders who don't have access now. The role of council will change. They'll become a legislative body. They'll have more time and attention to develop thoughtful policy in partnership with coalitions and with Portlanders, and have more time to help Portlanders navigate and access city services. In fact, we will be returning, when we first moved to the commission form of government, city councilors represented about 52,000 Portlanders. And this model contemplates moving back to that number, where we will have 1 city councilor representing around 50,000 Portlanders, which, by the way, is a recommended standard if you look at the research. We are coupling multi-member districts, so there will be 3 members elected with 4 distinct geographic districts, with a voting method called proportional ranked choice voting. And that results in what's called a proportional representation system, which is the most used system in the democratic world. And it's based on this premise that everyone deserves a fair chance at fair representation. Multiple jurisdictions across the US have some form of proportional ranked choice voting. And you know, there've been a lot of talk around the threshold, the votes to win a seat on city council if the ballot measure passes. And coincidentally, it's around the same number of votes that would be needed in Commissioner Mingus's proposal that he just revealed recently. In terms of how voters will be able to have their voice and make their choice in who runs this new structure, we're moving to a system called ranked choice voting, which is pretty simple and straightforward. It just simply allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference. as opposed to what they do now, which is oftentimes, it feels like a forced choice, like we're choosing between the lesser of two evils, or voting strategically, voting for someone that we might not really like, but who might have a chance of winning. Ranked choice voting, the research has shown, has not only led to better outcomes, we've elected more women, more folks of color, more small business owners, more first-time candidates. It's also, voters have reported that they actually enjoy the process of filling out their ballot. So simply put, ranked choice voting just feels better for voters.
Great. And if you can just kind of wrap it up, that'd be great.
Yeah, and the thing I would leave you with is really, this is our one shot, right? This is an unprecedented, once in a generation historic opportunity that Portlanders will not get in the near future to change our form of government and ensure that we become a city that we all need and deserve.
Okay, thank you. And Kathleen and David, if you can kind of introduce yourselves quickly and then give your opening statement.
Sure. Kathleen, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
I'm Kathleen Saadat, longtime activist, and have worked at City Hall and for Multnomah County and in the governor's office for the state of Oregon.
And I'm David Knowles. I'm a member of the Charter Commission along with Debbie and Becca, and former Portland Planning Director. And a fair number of years ago, I was a member of the Metro Council, elected twice. So I'm just going to provide a quick summary of our position, and then we're assuming that as we get into questions, a lot of the details will begin to emerge. So we want to make sure that you know at the outset that we agree with a lot of what the commission has come up with. We agree that the commission form of government needs to go. We agree there needs to be a city administrator. We agree that inclusivity is essential, and that's reflected in the commission's 6 adopted outcomes. We agree there should be districts. And we agree that there should be ranked choice voting for single winners. Where we strongly disagree is with the structure of the council, with the complicated and I believe confusing election method that has been selected to elect those multiple winners within districts. And we believe that the mayor, the organization of the mayor and the mayor's authority is too weak, and in fact creates a weaker mayor than we have today. So we'll go into more detail as we get into the questions, but hopefully that gives you an idea of where Kathleen and I are.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, let's start with the full proposal. It is changing away from the commission form of government to a mayor, city manager with overseeing council. You have ranked choice voting and multi-member districts, so 3 people representing each of 4 districts. No other city in the US has this. Why should Portland adopt this untested model?
I'll just start off, and Debbie and Paul, feel free to lean in. When the Charter Commission was looking at different models, we did not want a cookie cutter kind of off the shelf model for Portland. We wanted one that met our unique needs. There are multiple jurisdictions who have different components of all of the things that are included in the ballot measure. But given the feedback we received from Portlanders and the deep research that we were able to have access to over the 18 months, meeting Portland's unique needs meant coming up with something that made sense for us. And so, for example, with the mayor council model, there are a few tweaks. I mean, it's essentially a strong mayor model with one maybe exception, and that's a mayoral veto. And what we heard from Portlanders repeatedly is that they wanted to balance power between the mayor and the city council. And in fact, there was a poll that is publicly available done in July that say the majority of Portlanders do not support a mayoral veto. We also, one of the things we did is try to go back in time and look at the repeated attempts where something similar has failed and failed spectacularly on the ballot, 75-25. And a lot of those lessons learned was that Portlanders were very suspicious of the concentration of power in the mayor. So rather than giving the mayor a veto, we reached a compromise position, and the mayor has a tie-breaking vote on council in order to avoid gridlock. But the mayor still has full responsibility and authority for implementation and effective delivery of city services. They are ultimately the person at the end of the day who's responsible for that. They still maintain their emergency powers. They still have the ability, and in fact, they have additional and increased ability to effectively deliver city services and make key decisions.
And I
But
think,
how do you know? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was going to answer the portion about having a unique structure in the US. We did look at other jurisdictions in the US and then also looked beyond the US, because there are multi-member districts in a number of cities around the world, and it has been documented to have broader representation of different points of view. And so one of the things that we analyzed in depth and with many, many different simulations and discussions was looking at how many members in it per district to get the representation for underrepresented groups like communities of color, renters, low income, and in Portland, you could even say conservative voters as a underrepresented group, perhaps. But the way our population is distributed in Portland, there's no concentration of communities of color in specific neighborhoods. And so the 3-member district was a way to get those voices at the table in terms of our developing our city government.
So how do you know this will work, though? I mean, again, no US city has this. The city of Baltimore did have multi-member districts and moved away from that because they found that that was a disaster. How do you tell us, how do you prove that this is actually going to work instead of being yet another experimental form compared to the rest of the country?
So Helen, I would challenge again that, and I think Becca already answered this. So we know both parts of this work, right?
But together, right?
The council, the city manager, I mean, I think there's no question that city manager, right? So we can put that aside. We know that works, right? That is very well established. STV, single transferable vote, proportional RCV. We also know that works. So this idea that it's somehow completely new, I was trying to think of the right metaphor. It's like, I'm going to be getting my first car that has, Sirius XM and in a power window. I mean, they're going to work together just fine. By the way, Baltimore, it's not a good comparison. It's not the voting system that was endorsed here. In the Baltimore system, it's called block voting. That was the problem there. This system, by relying on the ranked choice voting proportionality, it is not, the Baltimore is just not a good comparison.
So how do you tell me that it's not, that this is just akin to getting a new car with different features? So let me ask you, can you explain how ranked choice would work with electing 3 members per district?
I can, I'm sure others can as well, certainly. So there's going to be an array of candidates, and you give ranked choice orderings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as far as you would like to go, right? Then the ballots are aggregated together. The candidate that passes the threshold, which is 25%, which is the correct number. I tried to address a lot of questions about that. In a single member district, you don't need 100% of the vote to win. You need 50%. With 2 members, you need 33%. With 3 members, 25%. That's the right number. So once you hit that 25% threshold plus a bit, the surplus votes are reallocated. So you not only are allowed, your first preferences can get reflected, but your second and third preferences, sort of depending on how those votes are allocated. Voters have an easy time navigating this. The election administration side is a bit more complicated, but we have superb administrators here in Multnomah County. And again, this is a known model. It's not difficult to implement this model.
So do all 3 members, and maybe just to split this up, Becca, do all 3 members have to have 25% plus 1?
They do.
So, okay, so that's confusing because the video that you guys have been tweeting and on your website from Minneapolis Public Radio shows that you don't have to make the 25% threshold. That even if you don't make the threshold, because there are no more candidates, that person will ascend to that seat. Is that incorrect?
No, this system requires that the 3 folks who are elected have to pass the 25% plus 1 threshold. That can happen in the first round of counting. I think, first of all, it's important to note that the voter experience is simple and straightforward. They'll get a ballot, they'll rank in order of preference. We know that they prefer this both method as well as the outcomes. In terms of kind of the back end, as Paul referenced, the rounds of counting, again, well-established models, there is technology available that has been implemented in multiple jurisdictions. They're counted in a series of rounds. In the first round, it's possible that 3 candidates can pass the 25% threshold, 25% plus 1 threshold. There you go. You got 3 folks who are elected within that district. If 3 do not, then again, as Paul referenced, then you continue in second rounds where the next choice votes are reallocated. And what that really means for voters in the end is that they're going to get somebody they like on city council. Ultimately, when we're talking about outcomes, they're going to get somebody that they have a connection to, that they didn't feel forced to vote for. They're going to have a relationship or connection ideologically to a member of the city council.
But isn't it possible, because, so for instance, let's say there are that the vast majority of voters in a district choose one person and they don't like any of the other candidates. So then who would fill those other 2 candidates? Let's say 80% of voters choose one candidate and decide I'm not going to even cast a vote for the others. Then who gets those 2 open slots?
Yeah, those are determined by, in the process, you take both vote, you reallocate the votes of the winning, someone who crosses the threshold. You take a proportional amount of their votes over the threshold and allocate them based on the second or third choices.
Right,
So,
but what if they don't have a second? Because people aren't required to vote for more than one, right? They aren't required to vote at all. So I guess what I'm wondering is,
describing a situation where 80% of the ballots said vote for a single member, they're exhausted. So we have many examples of these systems in place, and I challenge you to find an example where anything close to that happens.
but the problem is that I'm talking about a
and
multi-district, a multi-member district where so
understood, but
question,
you're coming
right?
up with this hypothetical that is so extreme. 80% of the voters are not going to express
Okay,
any
let's say 60%.
All
Let's
we
say
need 25%, right?
I think depending on the quality of candidates, it could get to that point. And so that's my question.
Why?
That if you have,
think you would
because
have
maybe they don't like
one
that. Okay,
candidate
let's
in
take
a quarter
position.
of the city?
Let's take
Portland.
let's take the race for position 2, where Dan Ryan got twice as many as the next candidate. And granted, this isn't ranked choice. This is winner take all. But he got the first choice votes of twice as many people as the next person, and I believe 3 times as many as the next. So that was a situation that had a lot of candidates that had very clear choices. And you can say that maybe people held their nose and voted for X over Y, but at the same time, that was a situation where there were not actually very many strong candidates running for that position. So my question is, can someone get that 3rd seat, let's say, with less than 25% of the vote?
And I just want to reemphasize what Paul was saying about the extreme nature of the example. We have never seen this happen in a proportional ranked choice voting multi-member district situation. And the other thing I think is important to emphasize is that by removing, one of the wonderful things about this new model is it removes barriers for folks who have wanted or contemplated running for office. Now they'll get their chance. 1, because it's districts, it's less expensive. 2, because ranked choice voting campaigns actually lead to a higher level of civil discourse where folks actually engage on the issues as opposed to, who's scandalous and who's ruthless. So it actually has the opportunity and ability to attract more qualified candidates, providing more options for voters. And again, we haven't seen evidence of it, and I cannot contemplate any time in the future that Portlanders wouldn't actually find 3 folks that they would prefer to serve on the city council and represent their interests.
Okay, but I would still like an answer to the question. I mean, could someone get that 3rd vote with less than 25% of the vote? Or that 3rd seat with less than 25% of the vote? Because the Minneapolis Public Radio video that you circulated says that yes, someone can.
I'm unfamiliar. The one that we sent today that's included in the frequently asked questions is a different explainer video. The charter language is clear that in order to obtain a seat on the city council, a candidate has to pass the threshold.
But okay, actually, because I've read through it and it was a little bit unclear to me in terms of if the threshold then becomes just that there are no other candidates, or if they've met the 25% plus one. Paul, is this something you can answer?
No, I don't feel comfortable answering honestly, Helen, because this may be the details of the final, the ordinance that will have to go through council next year. I don't want to stretch beyond my expert. It does not seem to me outside the bounds that in the establishing ordinance, you could require that every candidate appear on at least 25% of the ballots, which is essentially what you're saying. And if that didn't happen, presumably you have to have a runoff, or you have to run an election to fill that third seat. I still think, Helen, the example is extremely, I mean, you said, well, but with Dan Ryan, but that was key. It was a first past the post. It's just key. Nonetheless, I don't know fully whether, you know, in the establishing ordinance, again, as I said, is going to be written by council next year, whether you could put that requirement in.
Okay, so that's not something that's determined at this point in the measure itself. That is something that would have to be addressed afterwards.
There will be administrative rules about the conduct of the election that are not included in the charter. I think that's often the case. The charter is the Constitution. And so there are things that are in administrative rules or ordinance will be passed that implement elements of the charter.
Okay.
Which is not unlike when voters approve vote by mail or automatic voter registration. There is implementing legislation that will have to accompany.
Okay. And I apologize that I'm just focusing on you, but there's a lot about this proposal that I don't quite understand. And I think we need to ask all of these questions in terms of like vetting it. So, you know, one of the things that was discussed was the possible cost. Whoops, I'm sorry. I've been ignoring Therese. Okay, Therese Bottomley is joining us. So one of the questions is regarding the, gosh, I just got distracted. Oh, I'm sorry, the costs of implementing, or not the cost of implementing, but once this is in place, how much that would cost. And the range is anywhere from, I think, 900,000 to 8.7 million. Can you, that doesn't include salaries, is that right?
Oh,
That does. In fact,
it
actually,
does.
if you review the budget office's estimation, actually the bulk of that potential cost, and I say potential because the budget office was clear, they did not contemplate any cost savings at all. And we know, in fact, they even reference it will actually cost less to implement small donor program through this model. So they haven't contemplated any cost savings in terms of efficiencies or especially on the bureau end. And we don't know necessarily right now what the salaries will be, because also included in this measure is an independent salary commission made up of HR professionals. Right now, the city council sets their own salaries essentially. But what we do know is when those HR professionals are going to review the job description essentially of the city council, which now is primarily legislative and not executive and administrative, that they'll make salary adjustments. And in terms of our conversation that we had at the Charter Commission, there was a lot of legislative intent around both making sure that it is still a full-time living wage job, but also assuming that salaries are going to be less than city council makes now, because they will no longer have that executive and administrative responsibility.
But
so
these are,
okay. Sorry, the estimate includes, so it is a wide range from 900,000 to 8.7 million a year in terms of estimates, but that is, again, a fairly wide range, and it includes ongoing costs, salaries, district offices. I think in terms of, you know, some of the questions about the costs, it includes staffing changes. There are likely to be fewer staff per city administrator, for city council member, because they're not going to be managing bureaus. So that takes away a great deal of the work that they need extra staff for.
and
The
is
other
there,
thing I would also emphasize is just to put it in context, the at most cost that has been estimated, again, didn't assume cost savings, is 0.14% of the city's total annual budget. the city's annual budget is, 6.8, almost $7 billion, 90% of which is dedicated specifically to services and cannot be reallocated. So this is a very small percentage, again, normal kind of implementing costs. I would imagine Commissioner Mapp's proposal would also have similar implementing costs as well. And I would also just say, I mean, I know this is editorializing, but the cost of doing nothing is so much greater than this small investment to make sure that our city is run more effectively.
David, Kathleen, what do you say to that? I mean, it's pretty clear that we need change. I think that's been a very unifying cry from across the city. Why not this one?
I am really an advocate for a city manager. I have been for a long time, and for greater leadership in the city. And I like ranked choice voting, the first one, not the second one, not the one that's buried. There are lots of things that are good about this proposal. But when you look at it, the idea of ranked choice voting, which you say gives us more opportunity for making choices, is removed in this ballot measure by having all that packed into one. And that's my primary opposition. I would like to see those things separated so that one votes on, so that as a person who lives in Portland, I get to vote on whether I want ranked choice voting and which kind. Because while I readily endorse the first kind, the one that you describe as electing the mayor, I have still, and I've read several times the description of how the second, what is it called, transferable. It's still not clear to me how that works. I understand how the voter may find it easy, but I do not grab easily how the mechanism afterwards that transfers votes works. And I'm not sure about the rationale, except as a sort of a mechanical adjustment. In terms of this particular measure, its complexity, I think, obfuscates that secondary ranked choice voting. And I think that's a consequence of having as the primary presentation of the proposal inclusivity, which I endorse wholeheartedly forever, been working at it for all of my life. I believe in it. I, stood up in public and said it before. However, that inclusivity should be a part of the foundation for functional government. And the way I think about it, there would be a preamble to this whole proposal that outlines community values, including a commitment to and an obligation for any council member or mayor to see it as a foundational brick rather than something we're doing after the fact. Oh yes, and there's inclusivity. No, it needs to become so basic. I worked in '91 on future focus plan and diversity. It's 2022 and we're not there. We're closer, but we're not there. So that's another piece. The complexity obfuscates some of the details. And in those details are hidden things that, or not hidden, but because they aren't seen clearly, can disrupt and make things worse. My experiences tell me that it might be better to vote on city manager, how you're going to elect the mayor, rank ordered voting, number of districts. Give me a choice. That's what I would like.
And so what
But
about?
I want it separate from.
And so why was a decision made? I guess, why put it all together in one package? I mean, clearly there was a lot of interest in having different components. I think there was a poll done at some point, which apparently wasn't shared with a full commission, unfortunately. But why is this the only way to do it?
I think that the measures are interrelated, and I think we run the risk. I know some of in our discussions with the public, there's very strong commitments to having districts. There's very strong support for ranked choice voting. We heard that over and over again. And I think the form of government changes, while they make a lot of sense to those of us who have studied government and have been in government, I think to many voters, they're not as clear and they don't have as strong opinions about that. So the risk I think you run is that we would have districts, we would have additional commissioners, and then we wouldn't necessarily pass the form of government. That's been on the ballot many times before and hasn't passed. And so the concern is that you would have, say you had 12 commissioners, but they were still managing bureaus in the commission form of government. That risk would be so much worse than what the current status is that we have.
But you could have gone out with just the form of government one first and then roll out the others. I mean, the commission is continuing its work, right?
We are continuing till the end of this year, but the change that we would be sending to voters would not be voted on again until 2024. So there was just so much strong support for ranked choice voting and for districts. I think that we felt it was important to do this all at the same time.
Yeah, and just to kind of reemphasize what Debbie's talking about, we made the choice both for policy and for political reasons. For policy reasons, to address what Ms. Saadat was saying, and by the way, thank you for your years-long service in the community and for lifting up and always championing inclusivity. The policies fit together and only accomplish inclusivity together, right? Proportional ranked choice voting coupled with multi-member districts is, we looked at all different system designs, all different options. That is where we know, and research and case studies show, where voters who haven't had a voice and choice and representation at city council have the greatest chance to elect a candidate of their choice. It's where folks of color have the greatest chance to hold an elected position on city council. So the policies were interrelated, not just interrelated, but interdependent. They couldn't actually be teased apart. We even had conversations with, because again, it wasn't a foregone conclusion. We talked about potentially having them as 3 separate ones. But then we had conversations with the attorneys about how there'd have to be trigger language, right? If they're so dependent on each other, if one goes down, then in the one that was successful, there'd have to be trigger language that says, well, this one goes down if this one goes down because they're dependent on each other. And then for political reasons, Debbie mentioned this, and we talked about this earlier, other attempts at changing the form of government, not how we choose who runs and leads the government, has failed spectacularly. And I know we're in a new era and people are feeling it and they're ready for change, but all of the research, all of the statistically valid research, as well as the qualitative research that we got back from community, showed the least popular thing being the form of government change. And so my message to folks who, if that's their one thing or the most important reform in this package, is like, you want to hitch your wagon to those more popular stars. You know, ranked choice voting is the most popular, polling consistently at 70%. And so you actually want to strategically and politically couple the thing that is least popular with the thing that voters want the most to ensure its passage, not just for policy reasons, because again, they accomplish the desired outcomes. Kathleen, I loved what you said about a preamble. In fact, that's what we did. We spent the first 4 to 6 months as a charter commission, not talking about policy, but coming up with, as David referenced, desired outcomes. And those desired outcomes were efficiency, effectiveness, accountability, representation. And that's what we built the policy around.
And David, I'm wondering if you can jump in here, because I'm curious about just the argument that, you know, this hasn't, the efforts to change from away from the commission form of government have failed and failed and failed. Why would something that is, you know, centrally premised on that desire actually succeed this time?
Well, Portland, everybody on this call agrees that Portland is in trouble and there's some big complicated problems, and it's clearly driving a desire for change. The polling that just came out that indicated such an overwhelming majority of people want to vote for this measure because they really want to see things change in Portland. What is not going to be helpful is if we vote for change just for change's sake. We have an opportunity here to make a few corrections to the commission's proposal, to make some adjustments, to use the debate around this proposal to craft something that is not only addressing equity and inclusion problems, but also, as Kathleen was mentioning, the desire for a functional government. And I just want to drill in on a couple of things, if I can, around the voting method that, a couple of things that were said in the discussion we just had. First, there is no place in the United States that has a combination of multi-member districts and single transferable vote. There's been no evidence given to us that that exists anywhere in the United States. So there's no track record to rely upon. Now that in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but it's not a great place to start if we don't have any evidence of its ability to succeed. Secondly, this is a system that will give preferential treatment to incumbents. They're going to get not just one chance to stay in office, but 3. And I think we're concerned that it's going to lead to the accumulation of entrenched incumbents, and that in itself prevents other voices from getting on the council. Third, it's a very confusing system. The charter text is 300 words long. It refers to surplus votes. It refers to transferring surplus votes. I've mentioned in other forums, I have a law degree. I practiced law for a while. I'm no stranger to statutory text that's complicated, but it's very difficult for me to understand how this system would work. And it's not at all clear that the threshold is 25%. That's certainly not laid out in the charter text. And this is the first I've heard that this is going to be clarified by subsequent ordinance. But the problem is, if it's in the charter, the ordinance can't change the text of the charter. So that is going to be the law, no matter what. So that system is not something that we have any track record with, and we're very uncomfortable with that and relying on that system going forward. And finally, I would just say, I guess I'm a little old-fashioned, but I think a voter, if they wanted to look up the law, ought to be able to look at a few sentences to figure out how their vote's going to count and how you win or lose. That's not the case with this complicated voting method.
Let me also ask Becca and Debbie and Paul, what is your view of Commissioner Mapp's proposal that he just unveiled? Is that I'm presuming that you don't support that approach?
A couple of things I would mention. I'd first kind of go back to how I opened, which is process. I'm very thankful for the city of Portland for investing resources and time to provide the Charter Commission space to engage Portlanders. Thousands of folks have weighed in and informed. This is a policy that was built for and by Portlanders. And I'm unsure of what process Commissioner Maps has gone through. I don't know who he's spoken to, and I don't know who has helped inform this policy. And it also sends a chilling effect on people. You know, there are 300 people who applied to be on the Charter Commission, right? We feel very lucky, don't we, Debbie and David, right? To be one of the lucky 20. And so what message does it send to Portlanders who want to engage in the civic process to say, you can spend 1,000 hours of your life, 2 years away from your family, but we're just going to replace our judgment. We're going to replace your judgment with ours because we think we know better. So there's a process issue that I have personally, and maybe that's just because I spent a lot of time on the Charter Commission. And then there's a substance and policy disagreement significantly. And one of the major changes is moving away from multi-member, which helps. It is absolutely the change that's going to get us to a more representative form of government, to 7 single member districts. And we did deep dives, again, case studies talking to jurisdictions, that single member districts do not accomplish representation, especially in a city like Portland, where there isn't a high concentration of any, one type of community. So it is not going to lead to increased representation. It is unclear if it will be coupled with ranked choice voting, because he's contemplating having that as a separate one. And it's certainly not going to be contemplated with the proportional ranked choice voting, again, which gets us to that increased representation and inclusivity. We also saw an overwhelming amount of research, some of which just came out recently from Sightline, that shows single member districts have led to disinvestment and blocking important investments in affordable housing, transportation, other infrastructure. They're hyper localized, right? So it's like it is NIMBY at its worst. Whereas multi-member districts, you have folks working together, you represent a broader community. So in terms of meeting our desired outcomes of increased representation, single member districts just do not do it for us.
I'm sorry, the research you're referencing, was it comparing single member and multi-member districts?
It was comparing single member to at large.
Okay, so it wasn't looking at what multi-member
system. Yes.
So it wasn't
our goals were to how do we increase inclusivity from the current system to a new system. And so the Sightline research does compare at large to single member. The one last point about the Commissioner Mapp's proposal is its likelihood of passage, right? There are a lot of hurdles that have to occur before anything like this would be implemented. The first is getting to 3. And I've seen as a Portlander that it's challenging for this current city council to reach agreement, to get 3 people to reach agreement on something that is complicated or potentially controversial, right? And then even if they're able to pass that threshold of getting to 3, then it's gonna be on the ballot potentially in May. And I have, about 2 decades worth of campaign and elections experience in working on ballot measures, and I've never seen voters say no to something, which is what the no citing Commissioner Maps is encouraging people to do, say no to change and say yes to the exact same change with very small distinctions that no Portlander could probably tell you about, right? It's just not in the cards, it's not politically feasible, even if it makes the ballot, for voters to say yes to something that they just said no to. The other thing is the timeline. In our charter proposal, we have created an independent districting commission. They're writing those applications right now. They're ready to hit the ground as soon as the election's over to impanel that body of community members to draw the lines. Commissioner Mapp's proposal and timeline does not allow for an independent districting commission, which means that the city council gets to draw the lines. Again, we're looking for more opportunity for Portlanders to engage and inform an inclusive and transparent and accountable process. And his proposal isn't it.
I guess the timeline is another question, because under the measure, the idea is that there would be a commission appointed in January. There would be lines drawn as soon as September. Is that right?
The maps have to be adopted and completed by September. And that's enough. It's enough time to give anyone who would want to be a candidate the opportunity to decide between September and filing deadline.
And considering that this hasn't been done before in Portland, why do you think that that is a realistic timeline?
You mean drawing lines has not been done?
In Portland for city
lines. I don't think drawing lines is a hard thing. The technology, the expertise is out there. Portland State has we have highly well-developed geographic information systems at the Multnomah County Bureau. There'll have to be a process in place, and there'll be debate. There always is over drawing lines, but drawing lines itself is just not a complicated thing these days.
Right, the technology absolutely exists. It is the political aspect, though, that I'm wondering is going to extend it beyond a 9-month process.
Well, we already do it now for Multnomah County for their districts. And then there is a lot of involvement in state level districts for the legislature. So I don't think it's that unusual. And so I think it shouldn't be that much of a problem. And we have specified in the charter that the process would include public hearings and opportunities for people to weigh in, both at the beginning of the process before draft lines have been offered, and then 2 hearings per district for the proposed line. So I do think that this is possible, and actually tonight at the commission meeting, we're going to get some presentations about the transition planning, and there are plans. I understand just from as we've talked about this, there are plans to have some consultants hired to help assist in this process.
The other thing I would mention is that the coalition, members of the coalition supporting the yes side have a long and rich history around independent redistricting commissions. So the League of Women Voters has played a leadership role, so has Common Cause. They're ready to hit the ground running. The city, as I mentioned, is already beginning to put together the application process. Debbie mentioned, I heard that there'll be an RFQ out in the world pretty soon to actually find that mapping and demographer. I don't think, especially considering the 300 people who applied to be part of the Charter Commission, the wonderful thing about Portland is that there's never want for people who want to be civically engaged. I mean, I fully expect that the City Council, when they appoint that districting commission, will have to turn away hundreds of people who are ready to be part of that process.
So one of the other criticisms that's come up is a question of accountability for each district. If I live in District 1 or whatever, who do I go to for assistance on dealing with a neighborhood problem?
You got three options, Helen. Which one would you like? It seems to me it's great. You got three people you can go to. I've been engaging on these accountability. I don't understand the criticism. Accountability, generally understood by political scientists, is there's an outcome, a policy, something is passed, you're dissatisfied with an outcome, and you penalize the people that voted for it. The voting records are going to be there. You have three people you can speak to rather than one. I'm
okay, but that is actually
this accountability if people can't get themselves out of the geographic-based interests. That's a 200-year-old, really pre-industrial notion of thinking about interests. We have broader interests than that, and this proposal, I think, does a very nice job in allowing for the kind of aggregation of these broader interests.
So you were saying something about just, or rather David was talking about the question of ensuring incumbents are reelected because they have not just one shot, but three shots at keeping their seat. You know, you had noted that part of accountability is you penalize someone for not, showing or supporting your interests. Is that, is that a concern for you at all, that there may be someone who really is not good for the city, but either because there are, because of name recognition or whatever, that they are able to keep a seat?
Well, I'm a political scientist, and so I look at the status quo. If we don't vote for this, we've got the status quo. I know we've got this proposal, this idea that's floating out there that Commissioner Mapps has proposed. I commend him for thinking hard about it. I don't commend him for adopting this sort of my version of their campaign slogan should be vote yes for a better yes. Let's vote yes on this, and if you want to perfect it, we have time to do that. Let's not wait another decade to try to find more volunteers. So no, I don't worry about it as much as David does, because these systems have been shown to attract more broader, more diverse, more competitive candidate pools. And look, if an incumbent or a challenger is able to accumulate 25% plus one of the vote in a district that comprises a quarter of the city, then they should be elected or reelected. We already have such high incumbency rates. I'm encouraged this plan might actually create a little bit more competition than we have right now, which is not so much. We elect people in May. It's just your own paper, Helen, has published what it's been like over 25 years within a current system where so many of our incumbents simply get reelected in May and low turnout primaries. That is just not a good system.
Right, but in recent years, we've actually seen just a tremendous change in the candidates who are running for office, in the number of women, the number of people of color who are serving on city council. You can certainly argue that the small donor program is single-handedly responsible for making that happen. So
Yep.
Under that lens, looking at how diverse the council is right now, why is it that this is the avenue for which to ensure that continues versus doubling down on the small donor program?
At-large system just have so many problems. Just everybody here on agrees that we don't want to continue that large. So we're going to go to some sort of district system. I think that's a given. I like this one because it strikes a nice balance between broader districts that allow for some alliances, as a number of the individuals have spoken to, communities of color, different income categories, commuters, people that work in businesses can kind of ally together in these larger districts. But we move away from this really sort of archaic notion that all of our interests are expressed by our address.
Well,
And-
also just add that, yes, we have the most representative and reflective and diverse city council in history, but look at the history. Again, 75% of those serving on city council since 1995 have been white men, right? Small donor has been a huge support to first-time candidates and other folks, and we are removing additional barriers for folks to throw their hat into the ring as a first-time candidate. You know, I've spent the last, I don't know, 6 or 8 years talking to folks and encouraging them to run for office. And I mean, we saw a Black woman candidate who's running for city council who made the choice to not run for a variety of different reasons. And chief among them are the job is really hard and it's very hard to get elected citywide. And so moving to a multi-member district model with proportional ranked choice voting provides more of an opportunity, both what we've learned from research and what we've learned from kind of mapping it out for more diverse candidates to ensure that coupled with the small donor program, that more folks will get a chance to have their voice heard.
And I did want to just clarify something, because Paul, you were saying that, you know, that there is time to correct things, but there are, in what aspect, I guess, I mean, what can be done by the council versus what would have to go to voters to approve?
So my understanding is that anything that changes the city charter can be passed by council and would need to go to the voters. So if, for example, there were interests in changing the authority granted to the mayor under this proposal, that can pass council, as both Becca and Debbie referred to, that would be a much smaller bite than this much larger bite. And I have to say, Debbie, you know, Halloween's not here yet, but you gave me like the Halloween scare to have a large council and still the commissioner system. That's a very good point and a reason why these things need to be tied together and not separated, as Kathleen and David are advocating.
Can we weigh in on a couple things here?
Sure.
Kathleen, do you want to address the accountability question?
Well, it's a question. It's a lack of definition as far as I'm concerned. What does accountability mean in the context of this proposal? Accountable government with councilors who answer to the people. And I wrote, this is one of your outcomes from the initial work that you did. There are words that are used here: accessible, reflective government, responsive government. What do those words mean? They're words that we use all the time that people respond to positively. But it seems now is the time to give it greater definition. Since we want to change things and change the charter, it's time for us to be really super clear about what it is that we actually expect. When I say trustworthy, what does that mean? And I question how one does things in a way that says we are going to put this together because people may not vote for this. I'm not sure that I call that trustworthy. So those are things that I am uncomfortable with. Primarily, I believe that it's undemocratic in the long run, because you don't get the kind of democratic process or more democratic process that you do get with ranked ordered voting. What you get is, I cannot reject 2 parts of this and accept the rest. And so I'm torn between knowing that a city manager will be really, really, really good, and whether or not I can use the rank ordered transferable voting method. And I have to reject the whole thing.
Can I just,
And
go ahead, David.
no, well, there are a couple things I want to address, but Becca, did you want to follow up on that?
I really appreciate you lifting up the desired outcomes around accessibility and responsiveness. We contemplated that, and again, those were so important to build into the system. When we're moving to a multi-member district-based model, these folks are going to be more accessible. One of the factors and variables that go into the cost estimate is having district offices. They're going to be in your community. They're going to be more accessible. By the way, in all of the polling, when we asked folks If they knew how to get a hold of their city councilor now, there was a resounding, like, I have no idea. Or would you contact them? No, I would not. So providing that actual physical infrastructure in terms of accessibility, moving away from the commission form of government, and getting rid of that executive responsibility for city council members frees up their ability to be responsive directly to constituents, to help them navigate and access city services, kind of like the legislature does, right? For their folks who contact them and say, you know, I need, within the city's case, like, I want to figure out what's happening with my water bill. They'll have more time and intention to provide that help and assistance to Portlanders. And then the other thing I would say is that, again, that by the nature of the campaign, from the jump on the campaign, ranked choice voting campaigns are more issue-based. They lead to a higher level of civic discourse where folks are talking about issues and not personalities. And so Portlanders will get a chance to know of the three people who are going to represent them, if they have an ideological connection, if they have a policy interest, if they're their neighbor. And so that's also where the accountability comes in. They will have stronger, more direct relationships with the people who are representing them on city council.
And David, you wanted to jump in?
Well, I think Kathleen's got some things to say.
Well, I guess there's a lot of discussion here that assumes a lot about what people know and assumes a lot about what this will do to actually improve the functionality of government. Because I have an office in a district does not make me accessible. It provides the opportunity for accessibility, whereas there are three of us, I have an opportunity maybe to be accountable, but what is it that's going to really make that happen? What are the consequences of not being accountable? That is, not owning up to what you did. How do I find out? There's a whole lot here that is assumed about how, first of all, how human beings function, but then secondary, how the government, any one of them, and I've been worked in all three of them, have worked in the federal government, how they actually function and who does what and how. So I'm not saying that you have to answer everything, but I am saying that a lot of this is based on assumption. It's based on good intentions and people's good intentions. It's not necessarily based in the reality of day-to-day being in, in an office somewhere where somebody's supposed to come and knock on your door. I came to Portland from St. Louis, Missouri. I was so amazed at how accessible the city council members were. I could get an appointment. I could go see them and talk to them. I said, I want to live here. But I also know how they cannot be available. And I don't have any way to require them. One of the things I thought about, you want to make something that in your preamble says that people are going to have to meet with their constituency twice a year. I mean, give it some meat, give it some power. I'm going to stop.
Thank you.
So-
We are just about out of time, and I do want to see if any of the board members have any additional questions. No, we're good. Okay, David, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, please. I just want to follow up on what Kathleen was saying. I mean, this really gets to the issue of risk. This is a system, the council structure and the election method have no precedent in the United States. And, our concern is we're taking a form of government that we know isn't working and trading it for a form of government that has no track record. That seems too risky to us in our current environment, particularly when there are other forms of government well known to Portland voters that the commission could have opted for and that voters could opt for. And I think the fact that we have this alternative that's being developed is good for this debate. I think it's healthy to have this conversation. The commission, there isn't any public body in Portland that gets a pass on public debate when something is put out there in front of the public. So I think it's good and I encourage it. And if the proposal from my colleagues is as compelling as they say it is, they got nothing to worry about.
So that actually sounded like a closing statement. So if actually the yes side wants to take a minute or two just to wrap things up, that'd be great.
Well, I don't want to repeat myself too often, but we oppose it because it's complex to the point where it obfuscates some details. It is undemocratic. It is too much stuff in one ballot measure. And its success, if it passes, it will be embedded in the charter, which creates another set of problems. A lack of definition, a lack of clear roles in some instances.
And
I
I'm
think
sorry,
I'll stop
Kathleen,
there.
but I do want to kind of give it to the yes
Stop
side and
there.
then
Yeah.
wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I would just say that I think that I too welcome the debate, and we have many of us who are involved in the campaign have been out continuing our conversations with Portlanders, throughout the process over the last 2 years of developing these proposals. We've had multiple conversations, and I think Becca outlined all the public involvement that was happening, and now we're talking more with people, and we do hear a lot of support. And I think it is something that, while we have elements that are in the US, there are other countries around the world where this is a very common form of government. And we think that it will bring an opportunity for our government to be much more efficient and effective, and for our people to be represented in a way that they've never been represented before. So I think it's definitely a strong proposal, and has a lot of support throughout the community.
Great. Thank you again. Appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch with any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
so